rejecting Trump's argument that the Constitution allows his political speech and activity. And rescue workers in Taiwan are working around the clock to reach hundreds of miners, hotel staff, and tourists stranded after the massive quake. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. In San Francisco, I'm Ed Baxter. This is Bloomberg. All right, Doug has your money.
All right, we'll begin with the head of the Minneapolis Fed, Eddie. He is Neil Kashkari, and today he said that rate cuts may not be needed this year if progress on inflation were to stall. Kashkari went on to say this is especially true if the American economy remains robust. Treasury Secretary Yellen is now in China for more talks on trade. A focal point during this trip will be American concerns over a buildup of Chinese industrial overcapacity, particularly in the areas of electric vehicles and solar panels. Drug plans run by CVS Health will now cover over-the-counter oral birth control here in the States. Bloomberg has learned the non-prescription drug O-pill will be added to the Preventive Services Oral Contraceptives list and will be covered at no cost for many plan sponsors. Disney is planning to crack down on password sharing this summer for the Disney Plus streaming service. CEO Bob Iger telling CNBC today his company will test its password sharing crackdown in some markets in June and roll it out more broadly in September. Thoma Bravo is targeting to raise about $20 billion for its next flagship buyout fund. Thoma Bravo focuses on technology investments, and we are told the firm is discussing commitments for the new fund with potential investors. Microsoft's Azure cloud business is set to be hit by a formal complaint from antitrust watchdogs in South Africa. We are told the company will be accused of charging too much for businesses to switch their cloud licenses to other vendors. Now, the move is likely in the coming days, and it could set the stage for a legal battle that may end up with a fine of up to 10% of Microsoft's revenue in South Africa. And Kristalina Georgieva is poised to win a second 5-year term running the International Monetary Fund. The nomination period closed on Wednesday. No other candidates have put forward a challenge to Georgieva. This is Bloomberg. Today, the equity market pulled back in front of the employment data that's due tomorrow morning in the U.S., 8:30 a.m. Wall Street time. We had the Dow Industrial Average down about 1.4%. Similar drop for the NASDAQ Composite. The S&P 500 weaker today by 1.2%. The price of crude oil jumped on concern over escalating tensions in the Mideast. WTI in New York trading up 1.4%. Right now, we're trading above $87 a barrel. This is Bloomberg.
Now, your 3-day weather forecast on Bloomberg 1130.
It'll be partly to mostly cloudy around the city for tonight. Maybe a shower early on, low temperature 35 to 40. The periods of cloud and sun should return on Friday, along with a slight chance of showers. Breezy and 50. At night, fair weather in the 40s. And then partly sunny, breezy, 50 to 55 on Saturday. Sunday, a mix of cloud and sun and milder, up near 60 here Sunday afternoon. This is Gary Best with your weekend weather forecast on Bloomberg 1130.
News when you want it. Get the latest headlines with Bloomberg News Now.
President Biden and former President Trump clinched their party's nominations.
The top headlines from Bloomberg News, updated continuously throughout the day.
A major energy company merger could be in the works.
Get the latest news when you want it with Bloomberg News Now.
Evidence that the UK labour market is cooling.
Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app and anywhere you get your podcasts. Bloomberg News Now. Context changes everything.
Hi, this is Quentin.
And this is Brianna.
A little thing we love about Chick-fil-A chicken strips are how satisfying they are. The chicken strips are amazing. They're always filling, tender, and juicy. Definitely one of my favorite things on the menu.
My favorite thing is the last bite. The last bite is nice and juicy, and it's wrapped up in some crispy breading that keeps it nice and tasty. And being able to scoop up my Chick-fil-A sauce with it, it's just like the best part of the meal. It's an undefeated combo.
Order the chicken strips on the Chick-fil-A app today. Real customers paid for their testimonials.
Why just listen to Bloomberg Surveillance when you can also watch us live on YouTube? I'm Lisa Mateo.
And I'm Tom Keene. Join us weekday mornings along with Paul Sweeney and Michael Barr starting at 7 a.m.
Head to the Bloomberg podcast page on YouTube to hear and see the smartest voices on global markets and investment.
Make Bloomberg Surveillance an essential part of your morning routine weekdays from 7 to 10.
Visit the Bloomberg podcast page on YouTube and click on the live feed to join us today.
Have you Googled yourself lately? Are there negative posts from an ex-employee or from a former client?
maybe an outdated news article, or sensitive personal information about your family. Search engines don't always get it right. For right or wrong, it's your reputation on the line. That's where Reputation Defender by Norton comes in. One of the most trusted names in online reputation repair, Reputation Defender has been fixing people's search results for over 15 years. Their cutting-edge approaches help you to wipe away unwanted information in your search results. They also promote the good stuff, so that it rises to the top, helping you put your best foot forward. Your good name is too valuable to leave to the whims of a Google algorithm. Take control with Reputation Defender. You can start by getting your free reputation report card at reputationdefender.com or call 800-948-6033 to speak to an expert. That's 800-948-6033.
Don't let biased algorithms or degree screens or exclusive professional networks or stereotypes. Don't let anything keep you from discovering the half of the workforce who are stars. Workers skilled through alternative routes rather than a bachelor's degree. It's time to tear the paper ceiling and see the stars beyond it. Find out how you can make stars part of your talent strategy at tearthepaperceiling.org. Brought to you by Opportunity at Work and the Ad Council.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Just the suggestion from a regional Federal Reserve Bank president a strong economy could keep the Fed from cutting interest rates this year sent the Dow to its biggest loss in more than a year. It fell 530 points. The Nasdaq dropped 228, the S&P 64. Those are losses of about 1.25% to almost 1.5%. A spike in oil prices because of Middle East tensions also played a part. We may be severely underestimating demand for artificial intelligence and how that will mean the need for more data centers over the next 5 years. The co-founder of the cloud computing firm CoreWeave says the requests his company gets right now find many asking for entire campuses for themselves. Don't try to train OpenAI text to video by using YouTube videos. YouTube CEO says that would violate YouTube's terms of service. Just a warning, though, he says he doesn't know that actually ever happened. Joan Doniger, Bloomberg Radio.
Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Podcast Spotlight Hour on Bloomberg Radio.
You're listening to the Odd Lots podcast on Bloomberg Radio. I'm Tracy Alloway.
And I'm Joe Weisenthal.
On today's show, we are discussing the concentration of America's agricultural industry. We're speaking with Austin Frerick, author of Barron's, Money, Power, and the Corruption of America's Food Industry.
You mentioned that so much of the land in Iowa is not owned by Iowans anymore. You know, like I said, I was born in Michigan. I lived for many years in Illinois, but I didn't want to stay in the Midwest. I wanted to come to New York City and be a professional podcaster. And I get like sentimentally, like I said, oh, my idyllic family farm in Allegheny, Michigan. It was so beautiful in the berries. But like ultimately, like I didn't want to stay, you know, I never aspired to be a farmer. Like how much of this is just like structural changes in people's preferences that are just sort of maybe even much bigger than food? And yeah, you know, we remember fondly these small farms, but the next generation doesn't want to stick around.
I mean, that's a really key point to remember. And that's something, I mean, I wrote this book over 5 years.
Yeah.
And the beauty of doing that is you write a little bit, you walk away, and we romanticize that Glorian Pass a lot.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to go back to that New Deal supply management system because in the day, I'm at the point now we junk the farm bill, take that money, it's too corrupted, put into conservation programs because every farmland's different. The way you do farmland in Connecticut is different than Hawaii than Iowa. Also, the growth of robotics in agriculture has been really underappreciated. You go to a farm show now, these things drive themselves. I mean, they cost like $600,000 and they're going to happen before cars. So like there's a very good chance that most row crops are going to be robotics very, very soon. But to me, animals is the key thing here. I really want to put animals back on the land because the whole thing too to keep in mind is this model makes pretty bad tasting food. When I was writing this book, I was doing I would do milk tastings.
This is how you get the steak aficionados on board, by saying you'll have more abundant, good quality meat by fixing the system.
Oh, like my wedding. My husband and I got married in Iowa, and I was insistent we had pasture, meat, and dairy. And my mom's one of 12, Irish Catholic, you know, tales all this time. And we served pork, and the amount of people in my Iowa family was like, this is the best tasting pork. It was just like, we kept hearing that. And it's just like, oh, you're used to like when an animal stands inside a metal shuttle that eats corn from a ceiling, it's not going to taste as good as an animal that does piggy things.
So you mentioned scrapping the farm bill just then. What can be done at this point to, I guess, reverse some of the structural decisions that have gone into producing America's agricultural system as it is now?
Yeah. So one of the things that gives me hope is the movement to EVs, electric vehicles and cars, is going to kill ethanol. I think ethanol has been one of the most destructive things to happen to the Midwest. It actually pushed a lot of cattle farmers out, pushed them off their land. Instead of having cattle on pasture, they put in corn. And also the thing to keep in mind is the single largest use of corn now is ethanol. And that transition is going to happen fast when it happens. And so how do we kind of start pivoting? So as ethanol dies, then we slowly phase out these industrial animal facilities, put animals back on the land. It's a good jobs program, for rural America, because there's only so many animals one person can do. I think using school meals is a really good procurement way to like drive the supply chain. Like,
that's interesting.
Who doesn't want Wisconsin kids even drinking pasture milk, stuff like that. And then what started this whole conversation over berries is that model of berry production is rooted in sharecropping. And just ban that. Like, you can't
explain more. What is the specific berry model?
So the berry model actually comes out of chicken. I didn't even, when I started writing this whole...
It's the tournament system, Joe.
It's the tournament system. So when the meat regulations were written a century ago in response to the jungle and all that stuff, chicken wasn't written to the regulations.
Okay.
Because you didn't buy chickens at the store. You just had one in the backyard and you killed it.
All right.
So this model comes out of the South where, have you guys defined the tournament system before?
Remind us.
Yes.
Okay. So they call it the Southern model. If you're a chicken farmer in America, you don't actually own your bird. You're given the bird by the company, the feed, told it feed to use, whatever. You basically babysit the bird. You then sell it, you give it back to the company. They weigh it. You're paid on a tournament system. So whoever adds the most weight gets paid the most. So if, Joe, you're not behaving bad. If I don't really like you as some company, I give you the run of litter. You get paid least. You're not making that much money. Also, you have a ton of debt. These stats are a little old, but it's like 70% of chicken farmers in America live in poverty. And so you have this model take hold in the South with chicken production. And because of that, where you're shifting all the externalities and really abusing farmers and labor, chicken's really cheap to produce. So it gains massive amount of market share in the protein markets. Well, instead of forcing chicken to behave like the other meats, what we see is a race to the bottom. So starting the eastern shore of North Carolina, the hog markets in the poor black areas starts doing this model. To me, this is the best example of structural racism in the food system, is you have these poor black areas in North Carolina full of these industrial hog facilities. And because of the water table levels in North Carolina, they can't, and usually in Iowa, they take the manure and they inject it into the field. In North Carolina, they spray it in the air. Ugh. You have all these stories of poor black churches having to repaint their steeples every few years. Or they're dry, you can't do laundry outside, dry it out.
That's bleak.
So this model then replicates across the food system, most notably the berries. And I tell this story how the Driscoll brothers, they were smart to realize the rise of Walmart. Walmart wants one company to do 4 berries year round. So what they start doing is, most strawberries are really fickle. Historically, a lot of them were grown on the California coast.
So they grow them on the coast and they realize that it's more efficient to have that sort of outsourced labor, right?
Outsourced labor. Well, you have the cost of housing increase in California. That's a very short growing window on the coast. Historically, it would move up I cannot remember if it moves up or down the coast, but the production region would shift from city to city for the berries. Well, they started moving production to like Morocco, to Baja California, to the point now where Driscoll's grows berries on every single continent except Antarctica. But part of it is by moving offshore, there's less labor standards, there's less environmental standards. I spent a lot of time in the book talking about how a lot of berry production is in Baja California, in a region that is just as dry as Death Valley. They drain the aquifers. Then they build a desalination plant in the ocean. A lot of these are indigenous workers, and no one really knows what goes on in these places. I mean, you see stories here and there enough where it's like the tip of an iceberg, where you see there's a story in Reuters a few years ago how the gangs in Mexico got into avocados. you just don't know what's going on when these supply chains get that long.
This is part of the Bitcoin avocado correlation conspiracy, that the reason that correlation exists or used to exist, because it's broken down, has something to do with financing Mexican mafia.
I just have one last question, but since you brought up Walmart, and of course for years, and even still, but for years, the sort of grocery store system in the U.S. was famously fragmented. There really weren't any sort of dominant national chains. There were, regional chains. Obviously, just sort of big picture, like what is the existence of this dominant nationwide grocery store, biggest grocery store company in America? What are the ripple effects in terms of creating concentration of power elsewhere across the food supply chain from the existence of this one powerful end seller?
The Walmart chapter, that might be my favorite chapter of the book. It's twice as long as any other chapter. I mean, I also just love grocery stores. Let me start there.
Same.
But I also never thought of Walmart as a grocery store when I started this book, even though 60% of it sells grocery. I love this little anecdote where Sam Walton got the idea from Walmart from a French company, Carrefour. If you've ever been to Europe, you see these Carrefours everywhere. He saw on vacation, is like, I'm going to copy that. Because it gets you in the store. You need grocery every few days. Well, Walmart, at the same time Walmart's starting to rise, you see this whole framework, Robertson-Patman Act, collapse. These like basically competition protections in the system between suppliers and vendors like Walmart. And so as Walmart's market power gets bigger, it's able to basically squeeze its supplier more and more. And to me, this little nugget I found, I love reading trade press and like these little regional business publications. You find the best nuggets. In Northwest Arkansas, there's a business publication I spent a lot of time with, and they report how Walmart has a rule with its vendors that you cannot get more than 30% of your sales from Walmart, which I didn't understand at first. I had to ask around to the people in the grocery industry, why do they have that rule? And that's a supply chain risk management rule, because Walmart knows it's such a vulture that if more than 30% of your market, sales come from Walmart, you're putting the company into a fragile space. At the same time too, so that really puts a lot of power in Walmart's hands. I kind of compare it to like supply and command. My husband rejected this idea, but I really want to kind of frame this around like the closest thing we've ever had to like an American Politburo. He's going to laugh when he hears that. But the Walmart family, their power is just, they're the richest family in the world. And this whole chapter is framed around Walmart and Amazon have been in this epic battle centered in grocery the last few years. And I kind of came away thinking Walmart's winning. And the thing about the Walmart to keep in mind is Jeff Bezos only owns like 10% of Amazon. The Walmart family owns a majority of Walmart. They've been selling some shares lately. I think it dipped finally below 50%. But Walmart's goal is like, when Walmart comes to town, you don't buy more milk. You just shift your production. So Walmart has this goal to basically capture every dollar of America's underclass. They're putting these banks inside Walmart's. They're putting these healthcare clinics inside Walmart's, but they're also making vertical plays into the food system. They're building their third dairy plant in Texas. They're making a big beef operation in the Plains. And from my conversations with people is Walmart was so kind of fed up with being gouged by the other barons that it's making these vertical plays so it has an insight into the cost structure. So that way when it bargains with companies, it knows like, no, don't toy us around.
Man, tired of barons, so it became a baron itself.
Baron versus baron.
Joe, I want to ask if you enjoyed that conversation, but that doesn't seem like the right question. Let me ask, are you going to be walking into grocery stores muttering about antitrust and concentration and the illusion of choice like I am now?
Maybe. I think probably to some extent, I'm definitely going to pay more attention.
You're going to be dancing down the aisles going, this steak is on sale.
Well, so my takeaway from this conversation is that a lot of it is really about values. Like we can have a calorically abundant, hyper efficient food supply chain where maybe it's not the best tasting meat, but a lot of people can afford steak and hamburger meat and even fresh berries on a way that may not have been the case 20, 30 or 40 years ago. But there are clearly environmental externalities. Someone is going to pay the cost. And there are big structural changes to society in the sense that do we want a handful of companies, say, owning a huge swath of the land in Iowa or Michigan or elsewhere? Like, these are pretty legitimate debates to be having, and what is the optimal trade-off and what is the optimal mix. So I do think there is a lot of fertile ground for figuring out, like, well, where do we want to, like, calibrate that dial?
I think that's a totally fair way of putting it. Absolutely. It's a value judgment about what kind of system you want to see. I do think there is a tendency, not just with agriculture, but we talk about this all the time in finance, this idea that you kind of think certain things are inevitable, like the existence of money markets or euro dollars, that those kind of just happen. But of course, they were the product of conscious decisions, and there were reasons to do them. Same thing with agriculture. Something like the Farm Bill might have made sense when it was first proposed. Maybe it doesn't make as much sense now.
This has been Odd Lots on Bloomberg Radio. I'm Joe Weisenthal.
And I'm Tracy Alloway.
To hear the rest of this episode and all of our interviews, be sure to subscribe to Odd Lots wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to the Podcast Spotlight Hour on Bloomberg Radio. From the financial capital of the world, broadcasting 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is WBBR New York, Bloomberg 1130.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Asia for this Friday, April 5th in Hong Kong, Thursday, April 4th in New York. Coming up this hour, U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen begins her visit to China. Bank of Japan Governor Kazuo Ueda says the BOJ needs more certainty on inflation before raising interest rates again. And the head of the Minneapolis Fed, Neil Kashkari, floats the possibility of no rate cuts this year.
Israel to open border crossings to increase aid. Rescue workers continue work in Taiwan. Trump trial dismissal motions rejected. 2 today. I'm Ed Baxter with Global News.
That's all straight ahead on Bloomberg Daybreak Asia. On Bloomberg 1130 New York, Bloomberg 99.1 Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 106.1 Boston, Bloomberg 960 San Francisco, Sirius XM 121, and around the world on BloombergRadio.com and via the Bloomberg Business app.
It's a little past 8 in the evening on Wall Street from Bloomberg World headquarters in New York. I'm Doug Krisner. Welcome to the first hour of the Daybreak Asia radio program. Friday morning in the APAC region, so the final day of the trading week, and we start things off on a down note after similarly a weak session here in the States. Right now in Tokyo, a little past 9 in the morning, and the Nikkei right out of the gate is down about 1.4%. In Seoul, the Kospi down about 1%, and in Sydney, the market's been trading for about an hour now in the ASX 200, weaker by around 0.6%. We had a pullback in U.S. stocks in the run-up to the jobs report. That will be out 8:30 a.m. Wall Street time Friday. That's tomorrow in the States. Big move up in the price of crude oil today in New York. A lot of concern about escalating tensions in the Mideast. Prime Minister Netanyahu saying that Israel will operate against Iran and its proxies. Now, needless to say, direct Iranian involvement in the Gaza war does hold the potential for significant disruptions to global crude supplies. We were up about 1.4% in the New York session, right now trading higher by just 0.4%. Moments ago, we were above $87 a barrel in WTI. Short while ago, Samsung reported operating profit for the first quarter above estimates, but the shares right now in the Seoul session down about 1%, and we'll be taking a closer look at market action for you in about 15 minutes. Global News is next. And Israel is saying that it will make a move to get more humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip. Let's get to Ed Baxter. He's in the Bloomberg Newsroom. Eddie.
Yeah, look at this action, Doug. This after the call today with Joe Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu. Let's go through this. Israel now says, and this just moving in the last few minutes, that it is going to reopen the border crossing to increase the flow of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip. This will include a reopening of a key border crossing into hard-hit northern Gaza. And, of course, the South now needs aid as well. This after a call between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu, as I mentioned, emphasis there that the U.S. support for the war in Gaza is dependent on protecting civilians. Secretary of State Antony Blinken.
This week's horrific attack on the World Central Kitchen was not the first such incident. It must be the last.
And says potential victims are human beings.
If we lose that reverence for human life, we risk becoming indistinguishable from those we confront.
And NSC spokesman John Kirby says part of the aid getting in, which apparently is going to happen now.
A dramatic increase in humanitarian assistance getting in, additional crossings opened up, and a reduction in the violence against civilians and certainly aid workers.
Kirby says the U.S. needs to see actions reflecting change, and apparently that has started if Israel stays true to what it said today. From Israel's perspective, the elimination of Hamas is an absolute essential goal. Nir Barkat, Minister of Economy on Bloomberg Surveillance this morning, making it very clear.
We have to make sure that we eliminate them off the face of the earth. And that is the challenge we all have. And we are all united, all of Israelis are united in completing that war and eliminating Hamas off the face of the earth.
And says just as it was with Nazis, it must be with Hamas. And Israel's military is scrambling GPS signals as the country braces for possible Iranian retaliation for the suspected Israeli airstrike on a diplomatic building in Syria on Monday. Rescue workers, Taiwan, working around the clock to reach hundreds of miners, hotel staff, and tourists stranded after the massive quake earlier this week. Bloomberg's Bill Ferry says the focus is on the east, near the epicenter, located in the high country, and for the most part, it is relatively limited.
There are still people stranded, potentially trapped, but it does seem like, in terms of the human costs, that it's topped out so far.
Now, Ferry says the factories impacted by the quake are back up and running very quickly, but does expect reports to come out about delivery supplies and the like. Federal judges refused today to throw out the classified documents prosecution case against Donald Trump. Trump attorneys had argued on a decades-old law permitting the former president, they said, to retain records after he left the office. Denied. This is the second time 2 months that the judge has denied those Trump motions as well. A Georgia judge has now declined to dismiss racketeering indictment against Trump and several co-defendants. The judge rejecting Trump's argument that the Constitution allows his political speech and activity. That also has been denied. And God gave us rock and roll, and now Kiss will motor right through the Motor City and sell their song catalog to a group called Pop House, the Swedish company that turned ABBA into live concert avatars. Reports are the boys already practicing the movements to go virtual and rock and roll all night. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now in San Francisco. I'm Ed Baxter, and let's get back to the rockin' Doug Krisner.
All right, Eddie, thank you. Let's get to Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. She's in China for more talks on trade, and she's expected to press Chinese officials on the buildup of overcapacity in the industrial complex. We spoke earlier with Ian Bremmer, the president and founder of Eurasia Group. Here's what he told us to expect.
You're probably going to see more moves from the United States on pushing to restrict some of that. Some of that can be, moderate tariffs. Some of that can be export controls. But I mean, this is telegraphing to the Chinese that the Americans don't want surprises. The reality is, this is not going to be the easiest of trips. But 6 months ago, they weren't taking trips at all.
That is Ian Bremmer from the Eurasia Group. By the way, Yellen's trip does come after Presidents Biden and Xi did hold their first call in about 5 months. That happened last Tuesday. Leaders discussed Taiwan, artificial intelligence, and security issues. We go to the Bank of Japan next, and Governor Kazuo Ueda, who says that greater certainty will be necessary before any decision is made on raising interest rates again. He told Asahi Shimbun the underlying inflation rate of 2% has not yet been achieved. That's because the higher cost of imports continue to be tacked on to product prices. Now, Ueda said the BOJ ended negative rates last month because the certainty of reaching that 2% target rose to 75%. If it should rise to between 80 to 85%, Ueda saying that may be a reason to raise policy again. Ueda also seeing wage increases, those hikes that were agreed to by major companies, as eventually leading to higher consumer prices. Stateside, we had more than a half dozen Fed officials addressing the issue of rate cuts today. One of them, the head of the Minneapolis Fed, Neil Kashkari. Curiously, he was saying rate cuts may not be needed this year, especially if the economy remains robust.
If we continue to see strong job growth, if we continue to see strong consumer spending and strong GDP growth, then that raises a question in my mind. Well, why would we cut rates? Maybe the dynamics that we have right now are actually sustainable. But there are a lot of ifs underlying that question and that hypothesis.
He is Neil Kashkari, the head of the Minneapolis Fed, at a virtual event on LinkedIn earlier today. We also heard from the head of the Cleveland Fed, Loretta Mesters. She suggested the Fed could be getting close to the level of confidence it needs to begin cutting. And Austin Goolsbee, the head of the Chicago Fed, was saying today those higher than expected inflation readings in the months of January and February likely don't change the broader picture of cooling price growth. Let's get to our guest. George Boboris is with us. George is Managing Director of Research and Investments, also advisory at K2 Asset Management in Melbourne. George, thanks for being with us. Where are we right now in the inflation story?
That's the good question to lead with, but in the Western world, inflation is falling in a non-linear manner. Others are calling it bumpy. That is pretty much as expected for most participants in the market. But some do act surprised. But that stubborn core services inflation is an issue, and then it splits very quickly depending on what narrative you are. You can look at core CPI; it is upper end of that 3 handle, or you can look at core PCE, and it's upper end of the 2 handle. The direction's in the right way. It is non-linear. It is messy. There is stubbornness to it, which is predicated on the resilience of aggregate data in North America.
Are we underestimating the effect that the crude oil market could be having on inflation? I mean, we were trading above $87 a barrel in WTI, and Brent right now is above $91. If this is lasting, if this is durable in terms of the price moves in oil, could we be underestimating where we are in the inflation story?
Just like higher interest rates are less sensitive at this stage of the cycle in broader terms of the US economy, you'd have to say higher energy prices are as well, to a degree, at this stage of the cycle versus previous cycles, decades past. But the thing to reinforce here is that the demand destruction kicks in. Rule of thumb, econometricians like telling us 90 days of these sort of prices, demand destruction kicks in. 180 days, demand destruction amplifies itself if they were to be sustainably higher. And you need GDP and aggregate data to justify it. Just like high nominal bond yields, you can tolerate it if the economic growth in nominal terms is expanding. So it comes back to it is a headwind, it is demand destruction, it is a tax on the consumer. But taking a step back is that there's a resilience for the US economy and the employment's there. So in the US, you'll be filling up at a higher price, you'd be upset with hurt feelings, but in the main, generally, that economic activity is more robust to tolerate it.
Yeah, hurt feelings
to a degree.
In an election year. I mean, we'll see where that gets us, right? So let's talk a little bit about higher for longer in the States. Are you in the camp that we're going to get as many as 3 rate cuts this year in the U.S.?
Not so much 3. I believe they'll start 1 late in the year. But that's irrelevant. It's more, what does the data do? So having obviously Fed governors speaking about no rate cuts this year really gets the attention on the headlines so people can sit back and go, oh, what am I dealing with here? Because it can't be as binary as rate cut good, rate staying the same, bad for risk assets. It's got to be more nuanced to that. And that's what I think is happening, and people need to focus on it. So the economic data and the wealth effects for households in North America and their residential homes are much higher than what it was before. There's a double wealth effect in there. Yes, there's the fixed loans, and it's an asset in itself that has to be reset sometime. But why would someone's looking for price stability across an economy, why would you be cutting into that? So the data has to deteriorate in a faster momentum and pace, not just 1 month. It can't be just payrolls tonight. It needs to be weakness over 3 months, rolling 3 months, to be able to build that narrative of 3 rate cuts this year. But as it stands at the moment, earnings are growing. They're probably pricing to be too high single digits, but they are growing. It's quite healthy relative to expectations. And cutting interest rates in the face of these risks, and average hourly earnings is what we'd be all looking for, doesn't seem to make much sense to me.
So let's change gears, talk a little bit about China. And I'm curious as to whether or not, first, you think the economy has bottomed. And if we are in that process right now, could we begin to inflate a little bit and kind of emerge from this deflationary trap in China?
Possible. many moving parts, and your show discusses it all the time. It's very clear that household and business sentiment in China is at real depressed levels, unlike North America, and they got deflation unlike North America. So there are many moving parts as they've got to deal with the consequences of the biggest construction housing collapse we've ever seen. But it's very clear Beijing is very targeted. So the middle class is going to maintain this painful period for a considerable time as they deviate their policies accordingly, as pragmatic as Beijing always tries to be. So there is an aggregate turnaround of data. Sentiment is very, very low in there. And they are controlling, and the rest, this is why everybody's underweight autos in the West, they are controlling the next phase of EVs and the price discovery. So Janet Yellen needs to do her best work, and even that won't be enough on the current tour, because they are ready to unload lower cost products right across the board to the whole world, and that is good for China in itself. But from the investment point of view, this is the crux of it all. We are not putting finite capital into China for the last 3 years. We are buying earnings of those exporters to China, hence their energy overweight.
Yeah, it seems as though authorities in China are really caught between a rock and a hard place. I mean, I understand the weakness in the property market and how industrial policy as a driver of growth may be able to make up for some of that. But if you're dealing with overcapacity in so many industries, it's not clear to me how you can continue to use industrial policy as a driver.
No, spot on. There's sometimes some people would say there's some cognitive dissonance with some of the policy coming out of Beijing, but in reality, they're taking a step back for the grander play, the long term. They will unload cheaper products to the rest of the world that will allow it. And North America will maintain, they've obviously dialed up those tariffs in the current administration from the previous one. They can allow these cheap goods to come through, which they won't, and that would be CPI will fall very quickly. But in the main, China's just got a different playbook at the moment to where we were 3 years ago, and the middle class of China are going to pay that price. Look, it is a property construction collapse like we've never seen. It will take a decade to get out of that. But again, in the main, China is just coordinating that middle class, go through the pain, hold on to that pain. Aggregate data will get us over the edge, and they are producing some key goods, particularly in the technology sector, in the energy transition sector, that the rest of the world needs at a lower price. And that's the nuance of it all. How do they do it? And we believe the risks are, which you can't price in with geopolitical, is that there's tariffs go even off the current template, which is really high. Tariffs just accelerate in 2025 to another level. They're the risks for the global economy.
George, before I let you go, I have to get your take on Japan. We heard from Governor Ueda speaking with Asahi Shimbun, saying that really greater certainty is necessary on the inflation story before there is any more policy action in terms of raising interest rates. Where are you on Japan right now?
Firstly, Ueda has played it perfectly and engineered these nominal rates to zero very well. And it's obviously communicated in hindsight via local press in Japan. And that's been a good nuance. And he's targeted that March-April period, and it's panned out. I think they're right to reinforce that they've got to pass through more inflation, obviously the weakness of the yen, the issues for their corporate sector on that, and passing those through. Yes, the wage rise is already built in. I do think they've got, this is at this stage, the current policy mix is good. The overweight to Japan as a consequence is reasonable. You can overgeneralize that calendar 23 was a value play. Calendar 24 is a growth play, a GARP play for earnings in Japan. Mm-hmm. And I do think sitting back and that language is giving is quite good. So very happy with Japan, more predictive than it's been for some time.
George, thank you so much. George Boboris of K2 Asset Management joining us here on Daybreak Asia from Melbourne. This is Bloomberg. Seeing quite a bit of weakness right now in the Japanese equity market, with the Nikkei down about 1.6%. We do have a lot of strength in the yen here. 150.95. We're up about 0.2% against the dollar.
Now your 3-day weather forecast on Bloomberg 1130.
Some lingering clouds around for tonight with maybe a shower in spots. Low temperature 35 to 40 midtown, a bit colder in the suburbs. Coming up on Friday, clouds and sun, perhaps a brief passing shower, breezy and 50. At night, we're back around 40. Then partly sunny in the low to mid 50s on Saturday. Sunday looks like a nice day. Sunshine, scattered clouds, and close to 60. This is Gary Best with your weekend weather forecast on Bloomberg 1130.
Tomorrow, we zero in on March jobs.
Headline unemployment rate of 3.9%.
With fully employed America.
Will the numbers affect how the Fed views the labor market?
What's the why for 200 whatever thousand per month?
Continued resilience in the job market.
The March jobs report on Bloomberg Surveillance.
Job growth blew past expectations.
Markets on the move here.
Tomorrow morning at 8:30. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. And always on Bloomberg 1130. Context changes everything.
Interactive Brokers charges USD margin loan rates from 5.83% to 6.83%, rated the lowest margin fees by stockbrokers.com. Their clients can also earn extra income by lending their fully paid shares of stock. Join Interactive Brokers clients from 200 plus countries and territories to invest in stocks, options, futures, funds, and bonds on 150 global markets. Rates subject to change. Learn more at ibkr.com/compare.
At Mass Mutual, our commitment to wealth management means offering financial advisors the best of both worlds. With our innovative supported independence model, we're giving you freedom with resources you need to run your business, helping you make a name for yourself with our good name behind you, freeing you to offer clients the advice they need, and making sure you're properly compensated for that advice. When it comes to wealth management, we choose to lead. Learn more at massmutual.com/wealth.
When you get your news from Bloomberg, you don't just get the story. You get the story behind the story. How your EV's battery may not be as green as it seems. Why a decrease in global birth rates could send countries scrambling to increase immigration. How pond scum could change high-end fashion. You get context. And context changes how you see things, how you change things. Because context changes everything. Go to Bloomberg.com to get context.
Now your ideas don't have to wait. Now they have everything they need to come to life. Dell Technologies and Intel are creating technology that loves ideas, loves expanding your business, evolving your passions. We push what technology can do, so great ideas can happen right now. Find out how to bring your ideas to life at Dell.com. Welcome to Now.
Miss the top headlines on Bloomberg 1130. Get the latest news when you want it. Updated continuously throughout the day with Bloomberg News Now. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. And anywhere you get your podcasts. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
8:22 on Wall Street. I'm Doug Krisner in New York at the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. Let's get you caught up on market action. We've got holidays today on mainland in China and in Taiwan as well. A little bit of weakness in Tokyo with the Nikkei right now down about 1.7%. Using the WEI function on the Bloomberg terminal, you can go inside the market. Information technology leading the way lower. Had a downdraft in U.S. stocks. Now, bear in mind, we do have the employment report due at 8:30 a.m. Wall Street time today. We had a lot of Fed speak today. One member of the Fed, this is Neel Kashkari, who is the president of the Minneapolis Fed Bank, was saying today, hey, maybe rate cuts will not be necessary this year. Any rate cuts if progress on inflation were to stall. That's especially true, he said, if the economy remains robust. Even so, we had Treasury yields moving a bit lower. We've got a 10-year now that's very little changed in the Tokyo session at 4.30, a 2-year at 4.64. Right now in Seoul, the Kospi is down about 0.7%, and in Sydney, the ASX 200 is down about 0.5%. Crude oil, big move in New York. We were up nearly 1.5%. Some of this had to do with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying that Israel will operate against Iran and its proxies. Obviously, that has the potential to create significant disruptions for global crude supplies were things to get much worse than they are now. At one point, we were above $87 a barrel a short while ago. More on markets in 15 minutes. Global news is next. And Ed Baxter is in the Bloomberg Newsroom. Eddie?
All right, thank you very much, Doug. Israel says it's making a move to get more humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip. Israel says it's going to reopen the border crossing to increase the flow of humanitarian aid at the Gaza in the south, and also it will include a reopening of a key border crossing into hard-hit northern Gaza. This after a call between President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today. Emphasis there that the U.S. support for the war in Gaza is dependent on protecting civilians. NSC spokesman John Kirby saying the U.S. demanded quick changes.
It's not just about the announcement of concrete steps and changes in their policies, but it's the execution of those announcements and those decisions and implementing them.
And Secretary of State Antony Blinken says changes must be made in getting aid into Gaza, as well as stopping attacks that make civilians casualties.
The President emphasized that the strikes on humanitarian workers and the overall humanitarian situation are unacceptable.
And says a ceasefire is part of the process. From Israel's perspective, the elimination of Hamas is an absolute essential goal. Federal judges refused today to throw out the classified documents prosecution against Donald Trump, the second time that she's done that. As well, Georgia judges declined to dismiss the racketeering indictment against Trump and several co-defendants. Rescue workers in Taiwan are working round the clock to reach hundreds of miners, hotel staff, and tourists stranded after the massive quake. And NATO allies are urging caution of the expectations surrounding a proposed $100 billion aid package for Ukraine. In Brussels, foreign ministers have reached fresh doubts about the prospects of finding fresh funding for 5 years. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now in San Francisco. I'm Ed Baxter, and this is Bloomberg. All right, Doug?
Eddie, thank you. Let's go next to the energy space and the ethanol producer Green Plains. The company has unveiled a facility at its York, Nebraska complex. This will combine with refinery technology from Shell. The CEO of Green Plains is Todd Becker. He sat down earlier today with Bloomberg's Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Intelligence. Let's listen in.
It's actually going really well. You know, everything that we've laid out so far is on track to get to 2025, which is when we said we're really going to be able to start operating on all cylinders, no pun intended. But look, I think our base fuel still has strong demand, but there's other value that we can unlock in everything that we do. And there's so much technology out there. And we just announced a great collaboration with Shell, a joint venture that we just basically had a grand opening ceremony that really just takes us next level on what we're doing in ag tech, because they, as much as they are one of the largest energy companies in the world, they also have a really interesting view on agriculture and technology, and combining what we can do in energy with what we can do in agriculture. And we've just kicked off an amazing partnership that we've been building for several years. So a lot's going on, and we're really excited about what's happening.
All right, can you talk to us about this joint venture? Because when you mentioned Shell, that gets my attention when I'm thinking about kind of biofuels companies like yourselves kind of getting together with traditional energy companies.
Yeah, so look, what Shell's looking for is more low-carbon feedstocks. That's the most important thing to them. And what we're looking for is more low-carbon ingredients for food and for feed. And so we have this technology. We bought a company a few years ago, which we think is one of the leading ag tech companies in the world, called Fluid Quip Technologies. And they have a separation technology that basically just puts something into their machine and it separates it out into all really interesting ingredients. Shell, on the other hand, had a chemical process that basically unlocks what's left on different parts of agricultural waste or fiber or anything that's getting processed that we couldn't go after to start. And when we put these two together, basically we can combine their chemical process to liberate oils and proteins and other things that are stuck on sugars that are stuck within processes. And then we take it from there and we can separate them all out. So it's really an amazing technology collaboration. We want it so we can get more sugars and proteins. They want it so they can unlock more from the standpoint of vegetable oil so they can make renewable diesel and other things like that, as well as the last part of it is that we could finally unlock the sugar that's stuck within the fiber, and that's cellulosic sugars. And for years and years and years, people have been trying to crack this code on cellulosic alcohol and fuels and that dream that people have had. And this is one thing that potentially unlocks that whole dream of getting every piece of value out of every piece of that corn kernel. And the great thing about this technology is it's just not limited to a single commodity. It's actually agricultural feedstock agnostic. You could drop a lot of different things in this technology. So we think it revolutionizes agricultural processing, if it works, of course. It revolutionizes agricultural processing globally, biorefining globally, unlocks all of the value of what we do in everything from food and fuel and feed.
Yeah.
And it's the first time, really, we think that a major agricultural company or one of the first times a major agricultural company and a major energy company get together to use everything we do to make all of the different products that we need.
When you get the stuff from that, what do you use it for? And how expensive is it to sort of ramp and scale all this up?
The great thing is that over the last several years, as we've been transforming our company, we've deployed about $350 million to $400 million in the separation technology already. So we're already using it. So our technology is proven already. So we've put it at several of our facilities and joint venture facilities. So we are already beginning to separate most of what happens in a kernel of corn and other products. So what this does, you lay this over it, and it's all the remaining things that we can't get. They can get it chemically in their processes. We just could never get it that way because that's not what we did as a company. So, the cost, we're hoping, because we've already deployed technology at 5 of our sites, which is 6 coming on today. When we overlay this technology on top of it, we should be very cost efficient. The first one, we built it under, really, nobody really knew what we were building, but in York, Nebraska, we already have the first build that we've been spending years doing quietly under the radar screen, putting our technologies together, and we're going to start that up in about a month or two. And that's really what we had our grand opening and our announcement on. It was just a very quiet collaboration. But really what it does, it extracts everything available. So we leave corn oil when we send out our fiber. We can go after that. That can be used in renewable diesel and sustainable aviation fuel. We leave sugars on our fiber that goes out as animal feed. We can go get that, which can be made into cellulosic second-generation low-carbon ethanol. There's more protein to go after. We send out very low-value protein still. This technology together unlocks ultra-high protein that we're already shipping to pet food and salmon producers around the world. It just gives us more, and then lastly, what we're able to do is take all of that and think about low-carbon alcohol for things like sustainable aviation fuel that's going to be coming down in the future, because the only true path to volumes of sustainable aviation fuel is going to come through alcohol.
If it's cost competitive, if you overlay the technology and it's at cost for you guys, it doesn't raise the price of the product that you're then having to sell?
No, actually, we're just able to unlock more. We're sending it already out as everything left we send out as a more of a lower value product. So it unlocks all of that. And now what we can do is actually make great products and get much higher values for what we're going to produce than what we're doing today.
That is Todd Becker. He is the CEO of Green Plains, speaking with Paul Sweeney and Alex Steele on the Bloomberg Intelligence radio program, talking about ethanol as it intersects with the crude oil market. Today, the price of crude oil was up about 1.4% in New York. Fair amount of concern over escalating tensions in the Mideast. Prime Minister Netanyahu was saying that Israel will operate against Iran and its proxies. Needless to say, any direct Iranian involvement in the Gaza war does hold a potential for significant disruptions to crude oil supplies. Short while ago, WTI was above $87 a barrel. We've settled back now, $86.95. But the Brent contract right now is trading just above $91. Top business stories on the way. This is Bloomberg.
Live from the Interactive Broker Studio, broadcasting coast to coast. Bloomberg 1130 New York, Bloomberg 99.1 Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 Boston, Bloomberg 960 San Francisco, Sirius XM 121, the Bloomberg Business app, and Bloomberg.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Asia.
It's about 9:32 in the morning in Tokyo. We've got weakness in the Japanese equity market, down about 1.8% if you're looking at the Nikkei. We've got market holidays today in Taiwan and on the Chinese mainland. Closer look at market action in a moment. Right now, let's update a few of the hour's top stories. And why not start with the Fed? We heard today from the head of the Philly Fed, Pat Harker. He was saying inflation remains too high while the economy has been resilient and job growth remains strong.
We're not where we need to be. Inflation is still too high, particularly for the ALICE communities, the asset-limited communities and income-constrained. If you think of food, shelter, transportation costs, still too high. We're working it, but it's coming down, and it's coming down in a way where it is still creating jobs in America.
That is Pat Harker, the head of the Philly Fed. Profit at Samsung surged in the first quarter of this year. It reflects a turnaround in Samsung's semiconductor division, as well as robust sales of the Galaxy S24 smartphones. Operating profit 6.6 trillion won. The estimate was only for 5.37 trillion. Even so, Samsung shares right now in Seoul down about 0.7%. CVS Health drug plans will be covering over-the-counter oral birth control in the U.S. The story from Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet.
It is a step that further removes barriers to obtaining oral contraception as reproductive rights increasingly come under fire. CVS Caremark says Opill, that is the non-prescription drug from Perrigo, will be added to the Preventive Services Oral Contraceptives list and will be covered at no cost from many plan sponsors. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration cleared Opill for non-prescription use last summer, making it the country's first over-the-counter oral birth control product. In New York, Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Radio.
We know that Treasury Secretary Yellen is in China next week. Senior U.S. officials will be in the Netherlands to pressure the Dutch government to tighten curbs on sales of chip-making equipment to China. We'll be talking more about that a little later here on Daybreak Asia, and we'll take a look at market action for you. That's next. This is Bloomberg.
For almost 2 decades, one show has been there for the stories that matter.
You're listening to Bloomberg Surveillance.
The events that shaped our world and the events that shaped the markets.
It's all about Brexit.
The economic stress of the coronavirus.
The Madoff scandal.
The war between Israel and Hamas.
Now the legacy continues. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Lisa Mateo, and Michael Barr. Bloomberg Surveillance.
A stunning American jobs report.
Watch on YouTube. Listen on the Bloomberg Business app. And always on Bloomberg Radio.
Have you Googled yourself lately? Are there negative posts from an ex-employee or from a former client? Maybe an outdated news article or sensitive personal information about your family? Search engines don't always get it right. For right or wrong, it's your reputation on the line. That's where Reputation Defender by Norton comes in. One of the most trusted names in online reputation repair, Reputation Defender has been fixing people's search results for over 15 years. Their cutting-edge approaches help you to wipe away unwanted information in your search results. They also promote the good stuff, so that it rises to the top, helping you put your best foot forward. Your good name is too valuable to leave to the whims of a Google algorithm. Take control with Reputation Defender. You can start by getting your free reputation report card at reputationdefender.com or call 800-948-6033 to speak to an expert. That's 800-948-6033.
Life, it's full of moments, from first steps to first loves, moments that make life special. Now, life can also bring us difficult and disruptive moments like a cancer diagnosis, which is why the groundbreaking work of Stand Up to Cancer is so vital. They know the problem of cancer won't be solved by one doctor, one lab, or one hospital. It takes collaboration. That's why Stand Up to Cancer brings together top minds from different fields to find new and better treatments so patients can thrive. So when it matters, we can all show up for moments of a lifetime. Please join Stand Up to Cancer and Myrtle Beach to help families get back to where they belong, making new memories for years to come. Please go to standuptocancer.org to see how you can join the mission.
Buzz around artificial intelligence is seemingly everywhere. Is your portfolio keeping up?
Consider the Global X Artificial Intelligence and Technology ETF, ticker AIQ, which invests in dozens of stocks at the leading edge of this disruption. Investing involves risk, including possible loss of principal. Technology companies can be affected by rapid product obsolescence and intense industry competition. Before investing, carefully consider the fund's objectives, risks, charges, expenses, and more in the full or summary prospectus at globalxetfs.com. Read carefully. Distributed by SEI Investments Distribution Co.
Bloomberg Radio, on demand and in your podcast feed.
On the latest Balance of Power podcast, we talk with Gary Locke, the former U.S. ambassador to China, about the job-facing Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen on her visit to Beijing.
China is America's largest agricultural export destination outside of Canada or outside of North America. And so our farmers depend on selling their soybeans and their wheat and their apples and their cherries to China, along with Boeing. Most of Boeing airplanes are sold to carriers around the world, including China. So our economies are intertwined, and which is why Secretary Yellen is saying we don't want a complete decoupling, but companies, whether Chinese companies or American companies, are beginning to diversify their supply chain to include other parts of the world.
Well, as we talk about the supply that comes from China, Ambassador, one of the things we know that the Treasury Secretary is going to be talking about specifically is industrial overcapacity and the way that that can be manipulated in terms of supply and demand to affect pricing or access to certain things that China is producing. When she goes and airs those concerns, how likely is it that China is going to receive those and say, okay, yes, you're right, we will be changing our behavior on that front? Isn't it to China's advantage to continue that kind of overcapacity in production?
Well, China is trying to jumpstart their economy coming out of the pandemic by offering subsidies and government incentives for industrial output. Certainly, they are leading the world in terms of the manufacturing of electric automobiles and the battery technology that goes with electric automobiles and buses, and also in the solar area. But if they do so by having too much capacity, dumping their products into the world, flooding the world with their products, and driving prices down, that's going to actually destabilize the economy.